I'm Russell Quirk, I'm the founder and CEO of eMoov.co.uk. I've been dragged into the offices of Episode 1, our lead investor, to talk about our very, very successful recent crowdfunding campaign.
So why did you decide to do a crowdfunding campaign?
Two principal reasons. One was because of the speed that I understood that crowdfunding could be sort of undertaken in. Historically, where we've raised money through private equity and VCs before, it's taken 6 to 8 months. Crowdfunding, although it can be pretty intense, my perception was, having sort of looked at crowdfunding case studies, that actually it was going to be quicker. So lots of preparation, quite an intense campaign, and then a close, but we anticipated we could do it in sort of 3 months as opposed to doing it via institutional funding, which would maybe take twice as long as that. The second reason, it was very much also a marketing campaign, so it was not just about the money, but it was about my target, which was to try and encourage 500 people to invest in the business. We exceeded that. We exceeded it by some margin, actually, by about 50%. So we ended up with nearly 800 investors. The rationale behind that was really just as a further brand building exercise.
Did you research previous companies that are crowdsourced?
I looked at some of the real sort of superstar campaigns, so for instance, Just Park, Subaru and so on, so that they were two of the sort of the real high profile Crowdcube campaigns. And I also looked at some competitor stuff, so we'd had 2 of our competitors raise before us. Easy Property, that raised at a very, very high valuation. They raised about 1.4 million a few months before us. And then Estates Direct, who also raised about a similar amount at a valuation of about 23 million. So they were both relatively successful. We ended up, dare I say, raising twice as much as they did, so we're a bit more successful. But we definitely looked at them as barometers, I suppose, as benchmarks, yeah.
Apart from not hitting your target, what was your biggest fear?
I mean, that is definitely the biggest fear, isn't it? I don't know. I suppose I was worried about the time it would take, because that was an unknown, and it did take a lot of time, the preparation, and particularly during the campaign, because if you're running it properly, there's a lot to do in terms of answering potential investors' queries, either by email or on the forums. Crowdcube run a pretty slick forum where you answer questions, it's all public. I think as a consequence of it being so visible and transparent, I guess there's 2 fears. One is that you're really showing everything to everybody, which means that your competitors see your financial snapshot, your 3-year plan, an element of your marketing strategy. So that was a bit of a fear.
Who are your target audience?
We set the investment threshold really low. So some people advised us to only accept investments of £500 and above. We chose to accept, as you can with Crowdcube, from £10 upwards. And actually, if you look at the profile of our campaign, half of our investors, so about 400, just over 400 investors, invested less than £500. In fact, 400 investors invested an average of 105 quid. So basically 400 people accounted for just £40,000 of the campaign. So could we have done without that? Yeah, I guess. But then I wouldn't have those 400 people as advocates.
What sources of marketing did you use the most, and why?
Yeah, I mean, anything and everything. So we really drew on all of our marketing experience. So first of all, we did a match-funded deal with Crowdcube where we took some tube advertising for certain campaigns. That if you're raising over a certain amount, Crowdcube will, in our case, I don't know if they still do it, but they will support you in terms of match funding, some London Underground advertising. So we had 95 16-sheet tube posters across the London Underground network, 2,000 tube cards, so the little adverts that go actually in the tube carriage. So we did that. I don't think we can actually attribute specific investments to that, but it was a nice bit of background marketing. We did an awful lot with our own networks, customers, staff, investor networks, my LinkedIn network, our exec team's LinkedIn networks and so on. Social media was very, very big, so we got a reasonable following from people, particularly, again, investors and staff on social media. Crowdcube were pretty good at that as well in terms of pushing the message out pretty constantly. Their investor network, which they hit weekly by way of that database, and of course something that we're getting pretty well known for now, PR. So PR we were good at.
And what challenges did you face?
As the CEO and founder, you have to be the figurehead behind the campaign. So I answered all of the forum questions, of which there were 40 or 50, I guess. I answered the email queries that I got. I did one-on-one investor meets. We did 3 specific big investor meets. So that took up a lot of time, a lot of effort. So it was pretty time consuming. I reckon probably a third of my day during the 5-week campaign was just based on the crowd fund, the crowd round. Worth it in the end, of course, but that's a real challenge when you're also trying to hire people, get your product built, think about next year's budget and marketing strategy, and so on, running the business. And also, I guess, the challenge of actually closing the round out. So, making sure that you end up with very little drop off.
What's next, and would you do it again?
Definitely would, and I see no harm in, even if you're going to raise a big round, so our round will be, let's say, 10 million quid, would we do it again as part of that? Yeah, I think to raise $1 million as part of a 10 million Series A or Series B even, and to use crowdfunding for $1 million of that, as well as maybe a mixture of VC money, venture debt and so on, I think that's just a really broad and clever thing to do.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure all our readers and listeners will love watching this video.
Cool. Pleasure. Thank you.